morning has been quite the adventure, to put it mildly. The people from whom you've heard and seen, perhaps with whom you've shaken hands, bring an experience that, frankly, I pray none of you all ever have to endure. The surest guarantor of peace in this world is an extremely strong U.S. armed force. We have that. We must retain it, grow it. But it was once said that the further you look back, the farther you can see into the future. Those that don't study history, will be irresponsible in the present and unreliable in the future. Winston Churchill once said, study history, for in it lie all the secrets of statecraft. You've also heard this morning when General Spencer talked about leadership. There are a gazillion books and twice as many leadership programs and seminars and classes, to the point where you're beginning to wonder, really? But the fact is that leadership is people standing up for what they believe and willing to say, follow me. Follow me. Sometimes into the unknown and unknowable. We are pleased to have with us this afternoon, I don't seem to have a lot of luck with hints, but I'm going to try anyway. We will have with us this afternoon, come on out. Well, looks like we're ready. An incredible panel moderated by my friend and former Navy veteran, Barry Steelman. Vietnam veteran, a retired trial attorney. I try to forgive him for that. And a member of the American Veterans Center Advisory Board. Barry.
Thank you. I would like to welcome all of the midshipmen and cadets, as well as all the active duty, retirees, veterans, and guests here today to help us carry out our purpose at American Veterans Center. That purpose is to honor our past heroes from the greatest generation to the present generation, and to educate our future leaders, many of whom are sitting in this room today. During the next 2 days, you will be exposed to some of the finest and bravest men and women that have so proudly served our country in uniform over the past 75 years. During this conference, you will hear from various speakers from past wars with different skills and expertise and knowledge, and with many important lessons to teach you from their own military and civilian careers. Transitioning from your military service to your civilian professional career is the subject of today's panel. While this transition, for most of you, is years or decades away, but the importance of character, integrity, and ethics in decision-making and their skills you will learn today will be very important in that future transition. The character of a leader can define the unit, base, or ship that he or she leads, as well as the organization which you may lead during your civilian career. A cadet asked last night about how to react with your troops or your sailors when you first get to your first duty station. It reminded me of when I was just graduating the Naval Academy, which will be 50 years this spring. My father, who was a E3 enlisted man in World War II, said to me, son, if you want to be the best leader on your ship, just walk up to the chief, the senior enlisted in your division, and say, sir, I just graduated college. I don't know that much. I want you to educate and help me along the way. And that was the best advice I could have ever gotten. And I would ask each of you to do the same. Now, each panelist today will address you for a short period, then I will ask some questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. What I'd like to tell you at this time is when you actually are going to ask a question, please, it's being recorded, so please wait for the mic to be handed to you before you start speaking. Then state your name, your school, or if your unit, if you're on active duty, or if you're a civilian, just state your name and the city you're from. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel today. On the far right, your left, is a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy, Rear Admiral Daniel Bowler. He is the president of Whitehall Group, LLC, an independent defense consulting company. In this role, he assists companies achieve their strategic goals and marketing initiatives with the Department of Defense and other federal agencies. From 2003 to 2009, he was vice president of Navy Systems, Sensors, and Advanced Technology Solutions in the Washington Operations Office for Lockheed Martin Corporation. Prior to joining Lockheed in 2003, Rear Admiral Bowler served in the Navy, retiring as a Rear Admiral with nearly 33 years of service. He was a surface warfare officer with 8 sea tours, including command of the USS Lethbridge, DD-984, USS Chosin, CG-65, Cruiser Destroyer Group 5, and the Kitty Hawk Carey Battle Group. He participated in combat operations in Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, and the Balkans. His shore duties included Navy training and personal commands, the Navy staff in the Pentagon, and the Joint Staff. Additionally, he served as the 22nd Commandant of the National War College at Fort McNair in Washington. We're honored to have you with us today. Next is Emily Buckman. Colonel Emily Buckman is the Director of Systems Engineering and Operational Excellence, Information Technology Solutions for Northrop Grumman Enterprise Services. Prior to that, she led the Mission Assurance Team for the Global Logistics and Modernization Division Technical Services. She is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel who brings over 25 years of experience in logistics, supply chain management, distribution, transportation, command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance system integration. Colonel Buckman is a past national president of the Logistics Officers Association. She holds a bachelor's degree from the United States Air Force Academy, a master's of science from the Air War College, a master's of science from Central Michigan University, and a master's of science from the Air Command Staff College. Colonel Buckman, we thank you for being with us today. Next is Greg Parsons. Greg graduated Princeton in 1994 with a degree in political science. He joined Siemper Capital Management Group in 2008. He now serves as the CEO. Before Greg began his financial career over 20 years ago, he served as an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps, deploying multiple times to the Middle East. Combining a first-hand knowledge of the stumbling blocks along a veteran's transition path with an honored business acumen, Greg co-founded and serves on the board of directors of The Hero's Journey, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans transition to civilian life. Greg is also on the board of advisors of Stay in Step Spinal Cord Rehabilitation Center in Tampa, Florida. As part of an effort to share personal experiences and knowledge, Greg speaks frequently to groups around the country on veterans, transition, education, and rehabilitation. Thank you, Greg, for being with us. And our fourth panelist is Jeremy Stott. Jeremy Stott is a combat veteran and a former NFL player who recently launched his candidacy for Congress in California. He grew up in California to the son of a Vietnam veteran. He excelled in both football, track, and field, lettering 7 times in high school. Jeremy pursued a 4-year degree and a Division I athletic career at the Arizona State University, where he made football his sole athletic focus. There he won individual honors and competed for a national championship in the 1997 Rose Bowl. Jeremy played 4 seasons in the NFL. But after the 9/11 terrorist attack, he felt a calling to defend his country, and he joined the Marines. He served 4 years in the Marines, including a 9-month tour in Iraq. His military career was cut short with an injury. Returning to California, he began devoting his time to local charities serving veterans, as well as speaking at numerous schools, inspiring young people. To raise awareness nationally of the epidemic, as you heard about last night, the veterans' suicide and post-traumatic stress, he embarked on a 3,468-mile cross-country bicycle ride that started in California and ended at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. Jeremy developed a passion for teaching and welding and combined the two into teaching welding at his former college. He continues to teach while pursuing a doctorate in education. Please give a round of applause for our panel today. Now, each of our panelists will speak for around 5 minutes on the topic of transitioning military leadership, ethics, character, and integrity into the civilian careers. Thank you. Admiral?
Thank you, Barry. As most of the cadets and midshipmen here know, there are no greater bonds than those that you get when you do push-ups side by side with a classmate. So Barry and I did more than our fair share, so forth. But it's an honor to be on this stage with these other panelists, each a true and tested leader. In my early Navy career, I had the opportunity to co-write an article about leadership for the Naval Institute Proceedings called Manager Leader. I mean, if you have a choice, which would you be? The answer, of course, was be a leader. And what I've observed and learned ever since has been significant, but the answer is still the same. If you have the opportunity, be a leader first. And I encourage you to read about leadership a lot and to write about it as well. But each of us on this stage can talk about leadership. These are highly successful people up here that I'm pleased to be on the stage with. Have learned a lot. Many may have made a mistake or two, as I did, and you learn from those as well. We all have our nuggets of wisdom to pass on to you, and all are important and valid. My nugget of wisdom can be summarized in 3 words: interview the crew. This was given to me by when I was on the 3rd Fleet staff, then in Pearl Harbor, by Vice Admiral Diego Duke Hernandez. We were looking out his office window in Pearl Harbor across the Pearl Harbor water into the naval station, and I could see the ship that I was going to take command of, USS Lefwich. I was detaching to go to my first command at sea. He knew what an important move this was for me, and he brought me into his office and gave me some advice. He said, interview your troops, interview your crew. Do 4 a day, 15 minutes each. Have your staff admin personnel give you 1 sheet of paper per person, half of it for personal information about the member, the crewman, where he is, what's his name, what's his rank, pay grade, and so forth. Is he married? How long has he been on the ship? When does he expect to transfer, and so forth. But then on the second half of the sheet, leave room for notes. And when I finally introduced this concept to the crew, I told them, I said, we're going to sit down and chit-chat, and I'm going to learn about you, and you're going to learn about me, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. And I'm going to have a lot of questions, but there's one question that each and every one of you will be asked, and you cannot leave the captain's cabin unless you answer the question. And that question is, what is your idea to make this a better ship? What I learned in that process of doing interviews, and I took this process not only during my commander command, but when I had major command and command of an Aegis cruiser, and then when I had command of a carrier battle group, and I did it with senior members of the staff and so forth. And then again, when I was commandant of the National War College, where I was surrounded by scholars and very smart members of the military who were teaching. And I've probably done a couple thousand interviews. But it was really about, and I'm a strong believer that leadership is all about relationships. And so what this interview process did was allow those relationships to be built, to learn about their families, their goals, their likes and dislikes. There's also an opportunity, if you believe in the concept of as a leader, as a servant to his people, is to ask what you can do to achieve their goals. Do they want to, what's the next assignment they want? Is there something important to their family that perhaps I or the personnel system can assist with? We discuss values, my values, their values, and so forth. Values are critical to character. Character is a benchmark of being a good leader. It allowed me to put a name on the face, okay? Instead of Petty Officer Brown working in the engineering division, it was Dave Brown from Macon, Georgia, whose father was in the Navy, whose wife happens to have the same birthday as me. And so you learn about things about their family, their own character, and whatnot. And what it taught me, probably the most important lesson I learned in this process was that the smartest man on the ship was not in the captain's cabin. You know, when the answers I got to that singular question, what is your idea to make this a better ship, was stunning, okay? And most of them did not require a dime. It was change of policy, change of procedure, change, and I didn't care what they told me. Pizza at breakfast, paint the ship pink, you know, whatever. But you had to give me an answer, and they did. This process really empowered the crew, gave them ownership of the ship. You learned who's got good judgment, who needs to be groomed a little bit more. It was a wonderful process. And if you write down anything, you know, write down those three words, enter the crew. If you're an Army guy, instead of crew, say troops or whatever. So by doing that singular event, you know, and it does take time, it does take effort, but you build relationships, which is absolutely critical to leadership. You become their servant. It is not about you, but about them. You develop trust between one another, which is another critical element of leadership. You develop a love for them. And that's not to be misconstrued, so I love the crew. It's not, I mean, you really do appreciate them, love what they do for their division, their department, their company, the command. You find 1,000 points of light. I mean, you'd be stunned at the simple things you can do to make your organization better. You see the talent in each individual, and you're in a position to help grow that talent even more, to give them greater opportunities for them to excel. You see the people that make the organization, not the other way around. And you get an opportunity to share your values. You show them your character, you see their character. So leadership is about people. It is all about relationships. It begins with you, but it's not about you. So my nugget to you, interview the crew. Get to know them, get to know the men and women that you serve, that are serving you and serving your organization. And you do that, and you'll have the same experience I did, and it'll be beneficial not only to you, but to them, to your organization, your chain of command, and so forth. Thank you.
So it is such an honor to be before all of you, and of course sit on this stage following our Normandy veterans. That was really, I wish that would have been longer, because there were so many nuggets to just steal from them. But as I sit in front of you, I'm just so humbled and proud to see all of you in your sharp uniforms and your bright faces with your leaders, and I'm excited for your future. So I just want to share 3 quick vignettes that kind of span my career and I will do it definitely within probably about 4 minutes. But I really want to kind of play off what the Admiral shared on relationships. That's going to be my first story, the importance of relationships. So while I was deployed to Iraq, I was the director for logistics for detainee operations. So I was deployed with the Army. I'm an Air Force person. And believe it or not, the Army loves Air Force logistics people because we really are good at what we do. And so, we have a lot of grit. And I think a lot of my grit comes from my time at the Air Force Academy. So I was in the 9th graduating class with women, and I went from an all-girls Catholic school to the Air Force Academy with less than 10% women at that time. So that required grit. But I was a tennis player. I trained with guys. So it was an interesting 4 years, but I'm proud to say it was very, very proud of it. And for those of you that are at any of the academies or in an ROTC program, it takes a lot of grit to get through that. So my hat is off to you, but you will do it. So while I was deployed to Iraq as the director of logistics, I traveled a lot with the DOJ, and these guys were so impressive. They weighed they had 0% body fat, and they were all muscles, and they lived in South Africa if they weren't in Iraq, because they'd probably broken a couple laws, but they were really good at keeping those of us that were traveling we called them internment facilities all over Iraq. And one day they came and got me and they said, at the time I was a lieutenant colonel, but they still called me Colonel Buckman. Colonel Buckman, we need to take you somewhere. We've cleared it with General Gardner, who was the 2-star general in charge of detainee operations for Afghanistan. It was called Task Force 134. And I said, okay. And one of the rules, the number one rule they had, even though I had 2 weapons, is do not ever fire, we have you covered. Do not ever touch your weapons, we have you covered. So, and that was an important thing for me to remember on this journey, because they took me to, whenever you would go anywhere, and I learned these things at the Air Force Academy in ground-based defense. It's crazy, the lessons that I learned, because in Iraq, when I went to Iraq, I had no pre-training. Now we have a lot of pre-training. When I went to Afghanistan, I had 3 months of training at Fort Polk. But when I went to Iraq, I didn't even have a week of training. So the training that I learned at the Air Force Academy is what I 100% relied on. All of the things that I did there in my basic summer and the things that I did following that, especially survival training. So they took me, so you always had to pay attention where you were going. So I was in the back seat of an up-armored SUV. In those days, no one was allowed to get close with us. They would fire at anybody that got close to us. And they were taking, I'm thinking, I've never been on this journey. I've been to all of our prisons. I've been to their prisons. And I'm thinking, where am I going? And then we end up in this location. We're on a winding road. Nothing looks inhabited. None of the facilities look inhabited. And I'm thinking, where are we? But I had to trust the DOJ guys that were taking me to this meeting. So I walk into a kind of an abandoned building. Just imagine if you've watched any Iraq wars. This is a building that looks exactly like where they hold shuras, where they hold meetings to talk about potential peace and things like that with whoever the enemy is, Al-Qaeda or Taliban or whomever. So anyway, I walk into this room, and some guys come up to me, and they have beards, and I go, immediately I knew they were in the Navy. They were SEALs. And I'm thinking, okay, what's going on? Why am I here? And so they said, Colonel, we've worked it out and think about the Navy SEALs. When they deploy, they don't want Air Force help. They don't want, they rely a little bit, of course, on the Navy, because the Navy gets them there. And then they have their special forces. They do their own thing. They're incognito. They don't look the part. They're doing their own thing. And I can't believe it. I'm sitting here with them in this kind of abandoned building. So in that building, they said, we need your help. And I was like, they need my help? And it was surreal to me. I'm sitting in this setting in Iraq at the peak of the war. We had helicopters that were being shot down, lots of different things that are happening while I'm there. And we need your help. And what they needed my help they were suppliers of the people that we put into the internment facilities. They needed my help because it was taking longer to get information out of those they captured. So they needed sustenance. I was the director of logistics, all food, Korans, we were very good to those that we captured. We gave them Korans, we gave them toothbrushes, we gave them everything. Blankets, prayer blankets. And he said, we need those things so that we can make them comfortable. And this is not how they normally did things. But they realized they had to change their mindset. They had to rely on someone so that they could take care of their prisoners until they could hand them over to us. And so the lesson there was that relationships are critical and we need each other. So in your given environments, you will need each other to be successful. You need each other now, but I promise you, once you graduate, life gets harder. You may think it's hard right now, but I promise you it gets harder. And the grit that you're learning now in your college and high school years, because I think we have some high school students here, the grit that you're learning now will come to fruition in spades in the coming life. And so I fast forward to another example. This is about your character and doing the right thing when it's not popular. You all are already doing that. When people are smoking marijuana, you say no, because you can't. You wear the uniform. When people are getting drunk and falling on the streets, you say no, and you maybe pick them up and help them. You're doing the right thing when it's not popular. And when I was a colonel, a brand new colonel, I had the opportunity to run a group, a base, and I won't tell you, I don't want to go into the details, because you look at my bio, you could tie some of my stories into 4-star generals today, and I don't want to do that, that are still serving. But we were both colonels, and I worked for a colonel that wanted me to fire one of my squadron commanders, and this person was in charge of my security forces. But they didn't get along. They had a personality conflict, but it wasn't the security forces command, it wasn't her, it was the boss. So I knew I had to stand by her. But let me tell you, it wasn't popular. I got so much pressure. He said, you need to fire her. I said, I'm not firing her. She has not done anything wrong. So he ended up firing the chief. He reached down and fired some other people. And then fast forward, we went through a major inspection. Because of her, the entire wing was saved. So when you get into we had some security issues at other bases that I owned. So I owned 28 different locations. And because of her, and she got a zillion best practices, it saved the wing in our operational readiness inspection. And so I stood by her. But I have to tell you, there was a cost. There was a major cost for my career. I was on a fast track. I had already been promoted 3 times. I was on track to make general officer. So the cost was that year in the Air Force, I didn't get a number. And a number is something I can't even go into. It's too many details. But your first year you're eligible, you have to get a number. Then you get a number and a number and a number. So I did get numbers following that year, but I didn't get the first year I was eligible. And so years later, I found out why I didn't make general, even though I had number 1s and 2s. The reason I didn't was because I didn't get a number from him, but there was a cost. But guess what? The cost was worth it. It was the right thing to do. And it wasn't popular. Oh my God, the pressure. Now I fast forward to my current role today. They want me to fire someone that's on my team who's phenomenal. So the pressure is still there. Even though I work in a company of great character, I've been pleasantly surprised that the things that I valued in the Air Force are now valued in my current company, Northrop Grumman. We value integrity, we value ethics, but people are people, and they will still put pressure on you. And I'm standing by this person who is super sharp, and she is one of my right-hand people. And I've tried my best to see, am I not being objective? But the lesson I learned to stand by my people was when I was in the Air Force. So I just, I don't want to go to the third story because I'm out of time. Maybe I'll save it for the question and answer. But relationships are critical. And doing the right thing when it's not popular is critical because it's your integrity, it's who you are, it's your internal clock on life. So it's just a privilege to be here, and your futures are incredibly bright. Whether you serve in the military for 26 years, 33 years, 5 years, the things that you learn wearing the uniform will take you through the rest of your life.
Thank you.
So, Greg Parsons, CEO of Semper Capital. As is in the name, I was a Marine, and it really set the foundational bedrock for everything I've done since. And I got to say at the outset, crazy jealous, right? I actually can't imagine that I'm the guy that's been out for coming on 20 years now, and I'm looking back at folks that are on the front end of their journey. Everyone says this, you don't really believe it when you're in the midst of it, but it truly was the most rewarding experience of my life, bar none, and I've done a lot since. I'll keep it fairly short. As I think about, the construct of the conference, ethics, integrity, character, they really are the bedrock of everything you were going to need to bring to this quote-unquote civilian world. I spent a lot of time talking to vets and trying to acknowledge or frame out what I think, this isn't unique to me, but kind of a growing divide between the quote-unquote military veteran community and the civilian community, right? With less than 1% of the population serving, as you think about what that means for how veterans transition out of the military, attack the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the problem has a number of facets, but there is a divide between the two, and how do you bridge that divide and bring, frankly, this country's best resources, that being you, to the corporate world, or back to the communities. And so, I mean, the first kind of lesson learned, or what it took me a while to acknowledge, but now I spend a lot of time focused on, is leadership. Everything you are learning, practicing, you're going to experience, right? Kind of the bedrock of the military. It's leadership kind of at all levels. Doesn't matter if you're an E1 up to an 09, right? Leadership is a deliberate, practiced art. Everyone has their own style. You're going to work with folks that you're like, you take positive things away from. You're going to work with folks you take negative things away from, and you're going to build your own style. But leadership is not informal. It's not accidental, right? It's something that needs to be worked on, practiced, studied, right? And the military does a great job of forcing you to study leadership, right? It's kind of built into the framework of your daily existence, right? The civilian world drops it at the door, right? So it's on you to continue to practice and focus and bring the lessons learned on how you as a leader have evolved and bring that to the civilian world. Because, again, most folks spend a lot of time thinking about or training to being managers. And at least as I think about what's the difference between a leader and a manager, it all comes down to inspiration, right? I can manage you, and I can tell you what to do, and I can crack with a whip, and I can incent with a carrot. But the definition, at least for me, and as I think about training my folks and building my company and my organization, it's how do you add the element of inspiration on top of a manager's responsibilities? And that truly is, as I think about leadership, what I aspire to be and what I push folks, what I push downstream for folks to practice and do. So the first is leadership is a deliberate, practiced, trainable art, and it doesn't end when you get out of the military. Again, whether you serve for 2 years or 20. And frankly, the civilian world, opportunities are out there to continue to hone your skills, but it's a pull, not a push. And the second, right, when it comes to kind of leadership and kind of, the strongest takeaway from the military relative to, and I've worked at small companies, I worked at McKinsey, which is a large kind of bulge bracket company, now I run my own firm, is, the old school Marine definition, officers eat last, right? If you take that mindset to everything you do, it doesn't matter where you plug in as an organization. I got out of the Marine Corps and I started as a junior analyst on Wall Street, right? So I've played every role. I was the guy getting coffee. I then became a senior analyst. I was the guy building the model. Then I was a project manager. I was the guy building teams. Then I was a junior partner. I was the one selling services to clients. And now I run a 50-person organization. So theoretically, I'm running around making the big strategic decisions. But at every level and in every job, if you have a mindset of, look, my job as a leader is to eat last, right? By default, you're putting your people first, you're putting their needs first, building on what everyone has said today, focusing on your team, whatever your team is, at least for me, is what kind of transformed me from being a good manager to a leader. And the skill set is sorely needed. Again, right, there is a massive gap, massive divide, conversation for another day. But in corporate America, like folks that bring that leadership quality are the ones that frankly run circles around their peer groups. So, short, but.
Good job.
Hi, once again, Jeremy Stott, 0331 infantry machine gunner. As the only enlisted guy on the panel up here, I'm going to keep it real short because I know how it is to be out there listening to us run our sucks. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys right now, everything that these people have said is absolutely true. Being on the other side, I love what Mr. Parsons said about officers eat last. I've been around some of the best coaching, some of the best leaders in the world between professional athletics and the military. The one thing I can always look back and I always remember is watching the rapport that the officers made with the enlisted men. And especially when we're out in the field, we hated it. We're out there for 2 weeks, hadn't taken a shower. Our hands smell like our butts, and we're sick and tired of being out there. But the one thing I loved is that, when we did go to chow, and it was hot chow, obviously the officers washed their hands, but they were actually serving us chow. And that was one thing I said, man, that's leadership right there. If you're not willing to do something, don't tell your enlisted or your other officers, what to do. If you're not willing to do it yourself, don't even command it. And that comes down to one of the things I love about officers. I love Mustang officers, cats that went through the enlisted process and into the officers. I love those guys because they had been there. They've spilt the same blood and the same mud as us, and we actually have so much respect for them. But build that rapport. Build that rapport with those who you intend to lead. We don't like dictatorships, even though sometimes we find ourselves in one when you have to be. But build a rapport. Find out who they are. Find out their first name. Find out what's going on in their life. One thing I love in the Marine Corps, we'd always walk around and basically give the proper greeting of the day. Because you never know what that Marine was going through. All right, he might have got a bad phone call. Hey, good morning, Marine. Just by essentially acknowledging them that they existed was a great thing. So just when you got little butter bars and all that kind of stuff, don't think that you're great because you're getting that salute. Hey, talk to them. Build a rapport. I got a couple cats up there sleeping. Have moral courage. Tell them to wake up. Listen, you're getting some great leadership skills here that are being taught to you. Take that out into the fleet with you when you get there. If you're sitting around not taking notes, sleeping, you're missing out on some great wisdom. There's probably 100 years worth of wisdom being taught to you. And if you're sitting up there sleeping, laughing, giggling with your little head on your hand, you know what? You're missing out. You're missing the boat. And what's going to happen is when you get in the civilian world, you're going to be that 10%er that people go, man, I thought you were in the military. I thought you would have better leadership skills. So take what we're saying to heart. Like I said, we're not here to waste our time. We're volunteering it to hopefully help you in your transition and in your career. Jeremy Stott, U.S. Marine Corps, Semper Fi, God bless.
To quickly follow up on something that Greg and
Woke up that corner.
to quickly follow up on a point they both made, well, everyone made about relationships, is Dan and I have another classmate who'll be at the embassy tomorrow night. He got his 4th star and served as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. One of the most eloquent things I ever saw as leadership, my wife and I went to Norfolk when he got his 4th star from the Secretary of Defense. And after this one, he became commander of the NATO forces at that time. But after the ceremony, when everyone was off talking and getting their food, he went to every single table of the people serving the tables and went there and said, thank you for helping at my reception. Thank you for being here today. He thanked everyone they were paid to be there to work, but he took the time to thank them. That goes back to your being a servant of those you lead. So it's a great panel. I thank you all. Now, I prepared a number of questions I was going to ask, but since we're running short, I'm going to drop all that and open the floor up to questions. I can't see with the light, so I'm going to go to the podium so I can see you all.
I see him.
You see him?
I see him.
I see a bunch of blue,
Cannot see.
blue and white. Okay.
Got one on your right.
We can see.
Is that a mic up there?
We can't see that.
Is there who has the mic? Oh, okay, thank you.
Does this one work?
Yes.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, ma'am.
Please state your name
Okay.
and where you're from.
Okay. Midshipman First Class Dotson, Vanderbilt NROTC. This question's from Mr. Stott. We've heard a lot about how people transition from, the military into the civilian sector, and I was just wondering how the transition was coming from the NFL to the Marine Corps, and some of the lessons you took with you in that transition period, and how you've applied it to your life.
Absolutely, great question. That was probably one of the best decisions I ever made, going from a fishbowl lifestyle in the NFL to the Marine Corps. It was a humbling experience, but at the same time, it was actually the foundation that established everything that I've done today, even going after a master's degree, an EDS degree, and a doctoral degree. That foundation that I found in boot camp, the structure, the infrastructure, if you will, was amazing. But the biggest disappointment was coming out of the NFL and the Marine Corps going into the civilian world and no one going, oh my God, who are these people? My standards are way up here, even though I thought they were way down here when I was in the service. When you get out, you're going to find you're going to be very disappointed in the civilian world. They're going to look at you like you're silly and crazy, like, well, what do you mean? I'm up at 4:30. They're like, I just slept until 7:55 and we've got to go to work at 8. You're going to be very disappointed. Be prepared to that. But along the way, as you become the leaders in the civilian world and the free world, remember to try to bring those people up to your standards. Don't drop yours down to theirs.
Another question?
Midshipman, 3rd Class Scion, Virginia Tech. Ma'am, this question is for you. You mentioned you had a third story. Could you please share it with us?
Sure. It's so funny because I've now even, I get so engrossed in the event sometimes I lose my stories. But I would say, let me just share this story to kind of tie into what we're talking about. What I loved about my time in Iraq and Afghanistan was, and I'll just share this is important, my favorite time in my military service was being deployed because relationships mattered, having each other's back mattered. I'll never forget the day, and this is kind of leads me to the next story, and it really ties into what our former NFL player was talking about. I was on the road, and this was actually in Iraq, not Afghanistan, and I was with my tech sergeant, and I had about a 10-man team, and we were traveling, and on that day, they would do a lot of reconnaissance to figure out, they would gather intel, and on that day, they found out on the path that we were on to get back to Camp Victory, there were 11 IEDs. And so before they let you go, they got to clear out those IEDs. And for some reason, so they kept taking us to safe camps to try to find them. They could not find them, but they knew they had been planted. So on that day, I'm with my tech sergeant, who I was very close to because we traveled. He had been in Iraq at that time for probably about 9-10 months. And when you get there, you stop worrying. For me, I never worried about my life. I never worried because you had your comrades and you looked out for each other. I don't care if you're an enlisted or officer, especially in those environments, you really become comrades and you look out for each other. And I looked in his face and I saw fear. I'd never seen any fear in him before. And I wasn't afraid, but I looked in his face. So then I was a little afraid. And I was like, he's a little afraid. Am I supposed to be afraid? And then I remember calling my husband and just saying, please, I had 3 young children at the time. I still have 3 now teenage children, but at that time they were 2, 4, and 5. And I said, honey, just kiss them. I don't know if I will see you again. I never would tell him that, but on that day, I knew that I needed to do that. But the bottom line is, inside, I just dug in and I said, he always gives me strength, my tech sergeant. Today, I'm going to do the opposite for him. I am going to dig in, and I'm going to be the strong one. And that's what I did. And it was interesting. You talk about that relationship, enlisted officer. In a deployed environment, it's like those Normandy guys. They didn't talk about officer enlisted. They just were one team. And so it is so critical. Even if you go fly airplanes, that crew chief working on your plane, or you're a SWO and you have someone doing all the mechanics underneath, or the supply person. Everybody is equally important. Equally. Yes, we have different tiers, our jobs are at different levels, but we are equally important. And on that day, I realized that I had to be the strong one for him. And so that's kind of a third story that I wanted to share as a result of this, but I just remembered what I wanted to tell you. Sorry about that. But that one just was triggered. Okay, the final thing I just want to share is, when I deployed to Afghanistan, I was supposed to have 300 people. I was going to be the senior advisor for logistics for the Ministry of Interior. I did move into that role, but the 300 people were administratively moved from me, and so I only had about a team of 10 and 3 interpreters. And I was like, shoot, how am I going to do this? They're all matrix to me, but they're not hardline to me, if that makes sense. And I was disappointed because for command and control, it's nice when everybody's hardline to you. But what I found when I got to Afghanistan is I treated those people with so much respect, they ended up coming to me for their care and feeding every single day. So even though I didn't have the positional power, even though I was a colonel, I was still the senior advisor, because I treated them with respect, they came to me, and we had an organization just like I was the commander, even though they were matrixed to a staff person, or they were hardline to a staff person. So you all are going to have experiences where you get some assignment you don't like, some job you don't like. I'm in my 5th job in Northrop Grumman, and every single one has been an incredible learning lesson, like all the jobs you've had, crazy, lots and lots of jobs. And you just take it with courage, and you realize it's okay. It's okay to. And that's the lesson that I had to take is, okay, it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be, but it's going to be okay. I mean, the Admiral, I don't know how many jobs he's had. And I guarantee you, he didn't pick probably 3/4 of them, if all of them.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sir?
One more, sir.
Yes.
Good
standing there,
afternoon. My
please.
name is Cadet Major Christopher Willett from Bowling Green State University. My question is for the entire panel. So we talked a lot about building relationships and teamworks, and my question essentially is, how do we handle building relationships with subordinates who are not willing to change or willing to listen? Because sometimes it's very difficult to actually build that rapport with people when they simply are just stuck in their way and they don't want to listen or change anything about themselves. So if you could touch on that a little bit, that would be great.
Well, one perspective, I mean, you're at the easy part, right? Building relationship with subordinates in the military. At the end of the day, shut the fuck up, get it done. Right? Period of the day. You take.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
That doesn't
work in real life.
That dynamic, when you get out in the civilian world, becomes even more pronounced because, again, that's a sweeping generalization, but like, all of a sudden you have folks that, again, you talk about being disappointed to get to the civilian world, you have folks who are like, hey, my job is 9 to 5. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm building a business. My passion is my business. I have people that work for me and say, look, I get that it's your business, but I'm here for a paycheck, right? How do you motivate them? So, look, I think clear articulation of, there are ways to build rapport, but on the outset, what has been helpful for me is clear articulation of standards, right? Constant and direct and constant feedback, right? In the civilian world, there's the traditional. Every 6 months, you get your performance review, or every year, or every company has their dynamic. For me, what's been much more helpful in terms of, again, if there's issues around, hey, how do you build rapport, but yet I'm assuming there's some kind of challenge around performance that's the reason you can't build the rapport, right? The indirect, informal, but constant real-time feedback, both good and bad, right? Go out of your way to call out when things are working well. Go out of your way to tactfully, proactively call it when things aren't working well. So the very act of feedback relative to clearly articulated standards becomes something that's a norm and not, okay, I've been waiting and I got 9 months, I got my big review, and now there's a level of emotional tension around, okay, you are or are not meeting the standards.
Piggyback on what Mr. Parsons said. The other thing, too, is set the tempo early and often. You can't come in on soft and say, oh, this is what I'm expecting of you, but we might want more of. No, this is what I'm expecting of you, and keep it there. Keep it there. Set the tempo high. Make sure, and also live what you teach. Live what you preach. If you're going to have the standards up here, you better, by God, be doing the standards that high as well. So keep them all, even in the NFL, you said set the tempo. It was come out, hit the dude right in the mouth, set the tempo, let him know where we're going and how this game is going to be played. Same thing with you. Hey, this is where I'm at. This is where we're going to stay. This is where I need you to be. Set the tempo, keep it there.
I just want to add something. I'm not on the panel, but I had many in my division when I first became an ensign after the Naval Academy. There was one particular guy in my division, I think who was very rebellious. And I took the time to find out why and talk to him and let him know that he's as important as everyone else. And we're still in touch to this day. And I think you need to talk to your people. You need to find out why. I wouldn't, you got to listen to them because they have something important that's bothering them. So I would say if you have that, a good leader listens. And you listen to the person and find out why they have that problem or what's bothering them. And you'll have I was in Vietnam 50 years ago on my first duty station. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more because we're already about 6 minutes over, but yes, please.
Midshipman First Class Bolden from the Naval Academy. Admiral and Colonel, my question is for you. Were there differences in the reasons why you initially joined and why you stayed after 20 years?
Is it different then as it is now?
No, sir. Was there differences in the reasons why you initially joined and then why you stayed longer?
Initially joined, perhaps you come from a Navy family? I was,
Army family, sir.
that's even better.
Good choice.
So my father was in the Navy, my brother was in the Navy. I think the idea of service to your country was there from the get-go. I was actually living on the Naval Academy when I got accepted at to Annapolis and so forth. What kept me in for so long, I think, was even the jobs that I did not ask for were rewarding, and it was the people. It was just the people that I worked with, both up the chain of command and down the chain of command, and on either side of it and so forth. Helping them, working with them, working together to achieve the goals of the command, the mission. That was what I think gave me the personal satisfaction that I wanted to do this as long as I can.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
So
you.
I was a recruited tennis player. I was recruited by 10 other schools. But the Air Force Academy, why I joined, my father, yes, was in the Air Force. I knew that way of life, but that's not really why I joined the Air Force Academy. Number one reason was it was very difficult to get into. The process was it was just a long process. And once you get the appointment, you're like, I'm not giving that up. That was number one. But number two was that I would have a job when I graduated, and I was the oldest of 3 children. My education would be free. Yes, I'd have to work hard. And so all of those were the reasons why I joined. But the reason I stayed really echo what the Admiral said. I loved serving my country. I loved leading others. I loved it just became such a big part of who I was. I couldn't imagine any other life. And yes, I'd wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to do these other things. But once I just got into just serving and the opportunities, and I had when I was a lieutenant, I had a 3-star and a 4-star general. They were colonels at the time who became 3s and 4-stars. But they saw me for who I was and believed in me. And I thought, I'm not giving this up. So that's love of country and just the environment. I stayed for 26 years.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
I want to thank all of you for being so patiently here today, and thank our panel, distinguished panel, for their insight. It's an important transition from your military days to your civilian days. And I think the more you learn as a good leader, the more you'll stand out in your career as a civilian. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for patiently listening, and we'll see you after lunch.
Good, brother.